Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing our series on Introduction to Maaseh Bereishit. I would like to dedicate the class for a refuah shlema for all those in Sydney who are still in the hospital. They should have a refuah shlema, and all of the families should be comforted. Last time, we began looking at what the Talmud says about Maaseh Bereishit. We're looking at Tractate Chagiga. It is mentioned many times. Tractate Chagiga, the second chapter called Ein Dorshin, is what we'll call the headquarters of much of the discussions in the Talmud about Maaseh Merkava and Maaseh Bereishit. Many of you were at the whole series of Maaseh Merkava, and we looked at the Gemara many times and quoted it. Now we are doing our introduction to Maaseh Bereishit, and we're back in the Gemara. We started last week. As I said, we're not learning it word by word, but I'm picking out a good amount of it, and we're going to do our best to understand it. Most likely, next week will be the last in the series. We'll most likely finish the Gemara next week, and then we will move on to a new series to be announced. So anyone who wants to follow or wants to look it up later in Sefaria, we're on 12a of Tractate Chagiga. It's the second chapter called Ein Dorshin, 12a, around 3/4 down the page. Okay, so Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. So Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, B'shah shebara Kadosh Baruch Hu et ha'olam, haya marchiv v'holech kishtei pikiot shel shete ad shega'ar bo HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'hu ha'amido v'amido. So it says, when the Holy One, blessed be He, created the world, it was expanding continuously like two balls of thread that were, I guess, kind of like you throw them and they just unravel, and they keep unraveling until God, the word here is translated in English, rebuked them and brought it to a standstill. How do we know such a thing? As we've discussed many times, that any statement, there has to be a verse to back it up. So they bring a verse from Job that says, Amudei Shamayim Yirafafu V'yitmahu Megarato. The pillars of the heavens shuddered and were astounded by God's rebuke. And here, their understanding, shuddered, means that they stopped expanding. So then Reish Lakish brings opinion, and it says like this: one of the names of God is Shin Daled Yud. Shin Daled Yud appears many times in the Chumash. And Reish Lakish says, what does it mean when God, he's addressing Avram, says, Ani Kel Shakai, I am this name of God. So Reish Lakish gives a very, we'll call it, famous answer. He says, Ani hu she'amarti la'olam dai. I am the one who said to my world, enough. How do we see that? If you look at the three letters of this name, Shin Daled Yud, She Amar, the She is the Shin. Olamo Dai, the Dalet and the Yud of God's name. Shin Dalet Yud, She Amar Olamo Dai. Enough. So now we have a question. We now know that it was really discovered by Hubble in the 1930s that the universe is still expanding. Now, we take that for granted, but even Albert Einstein, when he formulated his famous statements, E equals mc squared, and the laws of relativity, he posited it a static universe. He did not believe that the universe was expanding. And in fact, he put into all of his figures based on his belief that it was a static universe. It was not expanding. And then Hubble in the early 1930s with his telescope was able to prove that that wasn't true, that the universe was expanding. Later, Albert Einstein said, this was the greatest mistake of my life, that he didn't understand this. Now, that was 1930. We're almost 100 years later. And if anyone has had I'll call it the privilege to see the pictures that are coming back from the Webb telescope out in space, if you want to be blown away, please go to YouTube and look at what they're seeing in the universe. And you'll see why I'm bringing this. Now, it used to be, even after Hubble, other tremendous telescopes, that they understood that many stars were thousands or even hundreds of thousands of light years away. Now, these numbers are so astronomical that it's beyond really our ability to understand even a few light years, let alone hundreds of thousands of light years away. We all learned as children that when you see a falling star, it really happened millions or billions of years ago. It took that long for the light to get here. But now what they're saying is that the universe is stretching to billions of light years away. Again, these numbers are so beyond our comprehension. So I'm bringing all of this as, okay, so how do we reconcile with what is written in the Gemara, that God said to the world, enough. No more expanding. So the way that I understand it, just a second, I'm letting people in, is it's not a contradiction. Why? Is because here we are. Everyone who is watching is sitting in their room comfortably. I'm sitting here comfortably. But as we're doing that, the Earth turning on its axis is turning at thousands of miles an hour. The Earth, to go around the sun one time a year, that's what a year is, 365 days. It takes 365 days for the Earth to circle the sun. I don't have the figures in front of me. It's something like tens of thousands of miles an hour. We're moving. Then our solar system is also circling within the Milky Way. And here the numbers get even bigger. Again, I don't have them in front of me, but tens of thousands of miles an hour. And we're sitting here as if nothing is happening. How is that? Gravity. So I believe that is, in a certain way, what the Gemara is trying to tell us. Because if we look at the Big Bang, and the idea that right after the Big Bang, there was this tremendous inflation. The Earth, not the Earth, the world expanded incredibly quickly. And we are still expanding from the Big Bang. The mysterious thing is that the expansion is speeding up. You would think, let's say you throw a ball. In baseball now, they know or tennis, they know exactly how fast the serve is. But at a certain point, if there was nothing stopping the serve, at a certain point, it would slow down. That's just the nature of the laws of the universe. But our universe is speeding up. The expansion is speeding up. But what is holding the whole thing together is gravity. And so there really isn't a contradiction here, because in the beginning, gravity was not a separate force. There was what was called the singularity, the four forces that are keeping everything going: the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, electromagnetic, and gravity. They were all one force. And so gravity had not separated. And so there was this incredible expansion. And then at a certain point, the four forces separated in a certain way. And gravity began to exert its force, its power. And so here, I'm just giving over, this is my understanding of how we can understand that there's not really a contradiction here. The universe is expanding. And yet there is a force that is saying to it constantly, enough. You can't we would fly off the handle. If gravity would lose its power, its force, then we would we get sucked into the expansion of the universe. Okay, so now we have a very, very interesting, it's really deeply philosophical discussion between the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. So it says, Beit Shammai Omrim, Shammai nivra'u techila, ve'achar kach nivra'u haaretz. Shammai makes almost an obvious statement. When God created the world, he created the heavens first and then the earth. Again, he has to prove it. How do you know that, Shammai? The first verse in the Torah. Bereishit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So it seems like there's not really much to discuss here, except Beit Hillel turns around and says, the earth was created first. How does he prove it? In the second account of creation, it begins like this. After the 6 days of creation in Shabbat, it says, Eila toldot shamayim va'aretz behi baram b'yom asot Hashem Elokim eretz v'shamayim. These are the generations of heaven and earth in their creation on the day that Hashem Elokim created earth and heaven. Everyone points out the beginning of the verse is Shamayim va'aretz. But the second is Eretz comes before Shamayim. That is the proof that Hillel brings. So in other words, what Hillel is saying is, it might have seemed obvious that heaven came first, but the fact that in the second telling, it ends the first sentence of the second telling that the earth was created first, then that's his proof text. But it goes deeper. So Beit Hillel says to Beit Shammai, one second, says, Beit Shammai, Lidvarchem, according to your words, Adam boneh aliyah, ve'achar kach boneh bayit. It's like he asks a question. When a person builds a house, would they build the second floor first and then the first floor? You couldn't. You have to build the first floor first, and then you could build the second floor. Obviously, what he's saying is, it can't be that God created the heavens first, because they wouldn't be resting on anything, as it were. That's what Hillel says. So Shammai turns around and says, does a person, one second, so Beit Shammai says to Hillel, Lidvarchem, according to your words, Adam oseh sharaf v'achar kach oseh kisei. Does a person make a footstool first and then make the chair? No, you make a chair and then you make a footstool. So what does that have to do with our discussion? So he brings a pasuk. And the pasuk is, Amar Hashem, Hashemayim kisi va'aretz hadom ragli. God says, the heavens are my chair, my throne, and the earth is my footstool. That's how Shammai answers. Okay, so before we go further, what are they really arguing about? The commentaries discuss, it's okay, you have a verse that says this, you have a verse that says that. But obviously there's something deeper going on here. And we'll call it the consensus is that what Shammai is saying, that again, understanding, remember, they didn't have telescopes at that time. They could see as many stars as the eyes could see. Nonetheless, they had an appreciation that it's call it a big universe. Even though, like I said, they could only imagine what they could see. But they already understood that these little dots in the sky were not like little dots in the sky, and they weren't so close. But Beit Shammai was saying is that if you take in consideration the largeness of the world and all of the spiritual worlds, all of the angelic worlds, the strata after strata of creations, the earth is almost like a second thought, is minuscule compared to the heavens and everything that the heavens represent. Remember, we've learned that the first verse in the Torah, when it says that God created et hashamayim ve'et ha'oretz. What is the et? Meaning everything spiritual. And et ha'oretz is everything physical. But even though with this great physical universe we have, our tradition has always been that that is just one world, Olam Asiyah. There's world upon world upon world that we don't see. We call it the angelic realms. So Shammai was saying heaven was created first. And also the idea that as much as we praise God, that is the idea of prayer and Hallel, but in comparison to the untold angels that are constantly praising God, again, we're just a little part of the bigger picture. Hillel says the opposite. Hillel says that, with all due respect to all the higher worlds, angels do not have free will. Only human beings were granted with free will. Only humans had God breathed into them nishmat chayim, the breath of life, the soul of life. And the main thing is here, Eretz, what is happening in this world, not to deny or put down or not give credence to all the other creations, but in comparison, God has a special relationship with human beings, and this came first. So they're not really arguing when we say first, heaven or earth, what came first. It's not so much chronologically, it's more purpose focused. What is the most important thing, heaven or earth? Then the sages come, and it says in Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer that at a certain point, Shammai and Hillel were graced with Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, and they understood that God created them simultaneously. And in the Gemara, it says, it doesn't say Shammai and Hillel came to this conclusion, but it just says that the sages, their opinion was that they were created together. So this, again, is a very deep idea here as to what is the most important thing? What is the essence? Sometimes it's discussed is our main task to bring heaven down to earth, or to raise the earth to heaven? Or is it more important to focus on the spiritual at the expense of physical? Or is it more important to infuse the physical with the spiritual? These are all just different ways of possibly looking at what Shammai and Hillel were actually talking about. And the Gemara goes on, and so the Gemara asks, now that we have this opinion that they were created together, they were created at the same time, what does that mean? So the Gemara answers, Delo mishtalfei mehadadi, means that they will not slip away from each other, that they are essentially integrated. So when the sages say they were created together, again, it doesn't mean in a temporal fashion. It means more in a philosophical, spiritual, purpose-oriented perspective, that they were created together because the essence of heaven and earth is to be integrated. This is very similar to, because we mentioned Einstein before. Before Einstein, space and time were considered as if two different realities, and they didn't really affect each other that much. There's time. Time works in its own context, and space works in its context. The brilliance of Einstein is he showed very much what the Gemara is saying here. When it says that they're created together, it means they were created intrinsically woven together. And that's when Einstein proposed that time can be envisioned as a dimension. Just like space, we can actually see the three dimensions. We don't see in a physical way time as a dimension, but it is. In other words, nothing would move without time. In other words, space, as it were, would be frozen. Everything within the context of space could not move without the dimension of time. And then Reish Lakish, remember, he was the one who said that God said to his world, enough. Shamar la'olama dai. So he says like this, Ke shibaru bara shemayim v'achar kach bara aretz. So he has a little bit different of an opinion. He says, when God created the world, he did create heaven first and then the earth, but achar kach natash, kishenata nata haaretz ve'achar kach natash shamayim. That God created heaven first and then earth, but when he, we'll call it, placed them in reality, he placed earth first and then the heavens. So it's just a different way of saying heaven and earth are two sides of the same coin. You flip the coin, sometimes heads will come up. You flip the coin, sometimes tails will come up. You could bring a lot of different verses to prove that heaven was created first. You could bring a lot of verses that earth was created first. So Reish Lakish is just saying, I'm proposing that they're both true. They're two sides of the same coin. Then the Gemara asks, we're talking a lot about Shemayim. So the Gemara says, my Shemayim, what is heaven? What is heaven? The Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Nechanina, Shesham Mayim. There is water. Now, for those who have been coming to classes for a long time, we've discussed Shemayim many times. And we've mentioned, if you look at the word Shemayim, you have a shin and then the word Mayim. Mayim, of course, is water. The shin is the letter of Eish, of fire. And so heaven is a combination of fire and water. So that's the second thing that the Gemara says. The first thing is, just read it. The shin of Shemayim is, and the mem, shin, mem, yud, mem. Sham, mayim. In other words, it's just taking one word and combining them into two syllables, as it were. Sham, mayim. But then the Gemara says, that in a different brisa it says Eish umayim, fire and water. Now again, we've learned this many times. I don't know about anyone else, but when I've heard something in classes, I read them in books, and you just, accept it, but then you find its actual source. For me, it's always a very exciting thing. So here, this is the source of understanding heaven as being fire and water. But what does that mean? So this is the idea that in heaven, all paradoxes are resolved. There are no paradoxes in heaven. Why? Because fire puts out water. Excuse me. Water puts out fire. Fire makes water evaporate. So it puts out water. So in this world, they are opposites. And not just symbolic opposites in nature. They are totally opposed to each other. But in heaven, fire and water coexist. They're not opposites in the way that we think of opposites. And so this is a deep understanding of what Shemayim is. And also this idea, and we say it in the Shema, the second paragraph, the second passage of the Shema, that we were hoping to bring heaven down to earth. Laman yirbu yemechem v'yemei b'nechem ala dama asher nishba Hashem Elokechem k'mei hashamayim ala oretz. That we should extend our days on the land like the heavens on the earth. So there's many explanations of that. One is, just like we suppose that the heavens will last forever, and so we should live on the land forever. Others explain it to, in a certain way, integrate heaven on earth. That the two should be united together, spiritual and physical. And then it continues, Eish v'mayim, melamed shehavian HaKadosh Baruch Hu utrafan zeh b'zeh v'yasa mehem rakia. From this we learn that God took water and fire and mixed them together, and from that comes the firmament. Now, let's look at the laws of nature. Well, rain comes from, we'll call it heaven, the firmament. But when you see lightning, it's pure electricity. So we actually see it, especially in a storm. We see the fire and the water. And that's what the Gemara is saying. Okay. So just to end this is like kind of like a sugya, a theme ran through what we learned so far between heaven and earth, fire and water. What comes first? What's more important? What's the essence? And ultimately, just like it says that God took fire and water, mixed them together, and created the firmament. So here we just see the idea that when we say the Shema every day, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, God is one. This idea of unity, And so what we're being told here is perhaps in this world, on a physical level, the laws of nature, spiritually, all kinds of opposites. Remember, the Torah begins with a big bet, which represents two opposites, dialectics, uh, diametrically opposed ideas and realities. But ultimately, Hashem Echad. And that is what's being hinted to in heaven. Everything is one. It filters down to this world in opposites. But that's why we say Shema twice a day. You think, do we really have to remind ourselves twice a day that God is one? Maybe once a day, maybe once a week, maybe once a month. But we're saying is because our reality is such a fractured reality, a pluralistic reality, we need constant reminders that ultimately everything is one, everything is unified in a way perhaps that we don't always understand, but it's the basis of our belief. Okay, now the Gemara moves to something else and says like this. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Tanya, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Oy lehem lebriot sheraot ve'enan yodot ma raot. Omdot ve'en yodot al ma hem omdot. So he says, woe to the people who see but don't know what they're seeing, who stand and don't know what they're standing on. So that's how this starts a discussion by saying, woe to the people who think the only reality that is real is what I can see. If I can't see it, it either isn't real or it doesn't exist or I don't believe it. So he's saying, woe to the people who see, but they don't really see the bigger picture. Woe to the people who stand, but they don't know what they're standing on. This is an introduction to the following idea. And I didn't say it this time, but I said at the beginning last time. All of these teachings are highly symbolic, metaphoric, allegoric. Nothing is really discussed openly. Everything is clothed in call it coded language. Okay, so it continues, and it says, Ha'aretz ama omenet, because it just said, woe to the people who stand, but they don't know what they're standing on. Well, what are we standing on? The earth. We're standing on the earth. So that's why the Gemara says, what does the earth stand on? In other words, people look and say, oh, I'm standing on the earth. And they don't see that the earth is standing on something. What is the earth standing on? So it says like this. Oh, so it answers, what is it standing on? And it brings a pasuk that says, Hamargiz eretz mimakoma, ala amudim, ala amudim. It says, who shakes the earth from its place and its pillars tremble. So in other words, it wants to say that the earth is standing on pillars. Now, if we were trying to understand this literally, we would say, oh, it must be that they believe in a flat earth and the earth is somehow standing on pillars. But as we'll see, we're not talking about physical pillars here at all. So it says that the earth is standing on pillars. And then it says, and what are the pillars standing on? The pillars are standing on water. I'm just going to go through this and we're going to go back and try to understand it. The pillars are standing on water. How do we know that? Because it says that God spread out the earth upon the waters. That's why every morning in our morning blessings, we thank God, Roka ha'oretz alamayim, that God, on the third day of creation, he gathered waters together and exposed the dry land, which alludes to the fact that at one point, the earth might have been completely surrounded with water. But part of, call it the evolution of the development of the earth, was the waters were gathered together and earth was revealed. And then it asks, and what does the waters stand on? And now they say the waters stand on mountains. So already, if we're following this, they can't be talking on a physical level here. First, we have the earth on pillars. The pillars are on water, and the water on mountains. Now, maybe we could understand it because we're told that we always think of the tallest mountain in the world as Mount Everest, 29,000 something. But they say from the bottom of the ocean, the highest is in Hawaii. Forgot the name of it, but it's only sticking up, I think, like 7,000 feet. But they see that it is really, it's just a mountain that is mostly covered in water. But the Talmud is talking about something more symbolic here, as we'll see in a second. Okay, so the earth is standing on pillars. Pillars are standing on water. Water is standing on the mountains. Then they ask, well, what are the mountains standing on? And here we'll understand that this kind of like destroys any semblance of physicality. It says that the mountains are standing on wind. Well, at a physical level, okay, maybe wind blows on top of the mountains, but here it's talking about the mountains are standing on the wind. And there's a verse that says that, behold, he forms mountains and creates wind. So you'd say, well, how does that prove that mountains stand on wind? And the answer, this we have to depend on Kabbalah, because we know that there are 4 Kabbalistic worlds. This world is called the world of action, Asiyah. And then there's Yitzirah, formation, Bria, creation, Atzilut, emanation. So in this pasuk, it says that God formed the mountains. That's Yitzirah. But he created the wind. That comes from a higher place, from a higher world. So here again, we're not talking in a hierarchy of physicality. We're going to go back and understand the symbolism here. So the mountains are standing on the wind. And what is the wind standing on? Ruach sa'ara asadavara, on the storm. The winds are standing on the storm. And what is the storm standing on? B'zroa shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on the arms of God. So that, in a certain way, ends this symbolic discussion. Now let's go back. Now, obviously, there are many, many, many different interpretations of what the Gemara is trying to tell us. It's obviously in symbolic language. What is it trying to tell us? So one of the ones that probably spans most of the commentaries are that, first of all, when it says, woe to the people who see but don't know what they're seeing, who stand but don't know what they're standing on. So they say, and then it says they're standing on the pillars. And so the pillars, this goes back to Pirkei Avot, right at the beginning of the Pirkei Avot, where it says that the world stands on three pillars: Torah, Avoda, Gemilut Chasadim. On Torah, on service, and acts of kindness. So that's really how we begin. These are the pillars that the world is standing on. So then the question is, well, what are those three pillars standing on? And so the answer is water. And as we've learned many times, Ein Mayim Ela Torah. There's no mention of water that doesn't allude to the Torah itself. So when we say Torah, Avoda, and Gemilu Chasadim, all three of them are standing on the Torah. All of them. Our service is based on the Torah. Our inspiration of Gemilut Chasadim, of doing good for others, is based on the Torah. Then the question is, what is the Torah? So if we're translating this, so what is the Torah standing on? So the waters are standing on the mountains. So who are the mountains? These are the scholars, the sages, the elders, the rebbes, the rebbitzins. Who is the Torah standing on? Real people. Because without the people, then the Torah needs to be interpreted. And so the mountains, these are those who lead the way in Torah, who interpret the Torah. And what are the scholars, the sages, the mystics, the rebbes, the prophets standing on? The wind, Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. That is what the great ones are standing on. And what is the Holy Spirit standing on? Here it says the storm wind. So this is a higher level. Ruach HaKodesh, of course, is a very high level, divine inspiration. But there's one level higher, and that's prophecy. And except for Moshe, all of the prophets, when experiencing prophecy, it was a, don't know the right word, like a traumatic, not in a bad way, but like a physical disorienting experience, because God's light and consciousness was entering into the prophet. And so many of the prophets would fall on their faces. In Maseh Merkavah, that's exactly what we learned. At the peak of his vision, he finally sees the glory of God, and it says, and he fell on his face. That was just the natural inclination. We learned that in the temple. On Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol would pronounce the name of God, which we don't do, but in the temple they would, everyone instinctually fell to the ground in awe. And then, well, what is the storm wind standing on? The arms of the Holy One, blessed be he. So this is just an absolutely beautiful example of so much of the deeper dimensions of the Talmud are given over in these allegorical stories, these metaphors. So here we just had an example that the world stands on these pillars, and we saw just a beautiful continuity of always going back to God. Everything ultimately stands on God's grace. Then the Gemara continues. Now they want to know from a different aspect, well, how many pillars are there? We begin, even though it didn't say it explicitly, with the idea that there were 3 pillars. But there's other ideas. So one idea is that there are 12 pillars. Shnei Masar Amudim Omeret. The world stands on 12 pillars. It goes without saying that these 12 pillars are the 12 tribes. Another opinion is the world, and again, each of these opinions is based on verses. Then there's the idea that it's on 7 pillars. And there's a verse that says, Hitzava Amodeha Shiva. And it says, it was carved out of 7 pillars. The earth was carved out of 7 pillars. Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua Omer, Kol Amud Echad B'Tzadik Shema. Then Elazar says, no, there's really only one pillar, and that is the tzaddik. That is the righteous one. That the whole world stands on this tzaddik. This is a very, very big concept in Chassidut. The idea of the world standing on the righteous one. How do you know this? Because there's a pasuk that says, Tzaddik Yesod Olam. The tzaddik is the foundation, the pillar of the world. Again, every opinion that's brought here, I didn't take the time to read every verse, but every single opinion has a verse to back it up. But this one is Tzaddik Yesod Olam. The tzaddik is the foundation of the world. L'chaim, l'chaim. Okay, this is a very, very good place to stop. And there's really only 2 other matters that we'll take up next week. One of them takes up a considerable amount of time. Very, very fascinating, and that's the 7 heavens. The tradition that there are 7 heavens, and they discuss what are the names of the heavens and what happens in these heavens. Again, very symbolic, very mystical, very spiritual. But we will go through it, not word by word, but we'll go through these seven heavens next week. And the last one is how much space is there between each of the heavens? And that really brings us to the end of the discussions about Maaseh Bereishit, and then begins the discussions of Maaseh Merkava, which we covered already in the last series. Thank you, Dara. While we have everyone here, no classes next week. Not on Sunday and not on Tuesday. You'll get emails reminding you. You'll get WhatsApps reminding you, but no Sunday and Tuesday class. Baruch Hashem, I have children and grandchildren coming from America, and they haven't been here for quite a while for the war and COVID and everything. And so I need to spend time with my family. So next week, no class. Everyone have a enlightening Hanukkah.